You're probably all wondering, what in the garbage am I looking at right now? And what you're looking at is my D.I.Y. pedal board that is in awful condition and was never finished. My idea was to have these be modular so I could move them around depending on my situation and how my pedals change. And I also saw another product that had zip ties holding your pedal boards in place wherever you wanted them. So I wanted to make this kind of a modular board where things could change and move around without too much hassle. And today I plan on finishing that with you. So one of the major objectives of redoing this pedal board, other than it's clearly just some boards nailed together, I bought this Dan Electro pedal board for pretty cheap, and with these daisy chain power supplies, it's unusably noisy. And one of the projects on the bench that I'm going to take you through, probably in a separate video, is getting an individual supply for each of these, because each one by themselves sounds fine. They're really good, cheap effects. They're pretty quiet, but when you chain them, at least when I chained them in my setup with the supply I had, it was incredibly noisy. So I need to solve that, but also I want it placed on this board. You can see I have a photogenic cat. He's kind of always in the shot, so you'll have to excuse him. No controlling him. I want to be able to move it like here, or maybe put it up on here and put it over here. A couple of the other thoughts I had is this is flat on the ground, and I'd like it kind of raised in the back so that it's kind of like, you know, your pedals are on a staircase. It's easier to access. Another thing I thought about doing, I probably won't, is being able to switch between banks of pedals, like one setup over here and one setup over here and one setup down here, and maybe like a switch where you could just have these three or just those four, but that's far off in the future. Right now my goal with this is just to create a pedal board with used materials. This is just some scrap wood I had hanging around, and it looks like it. Don't get me wrong, it looks like garbage. But I'm hoping by the end of it, we'll have something fully modular that looks good enough for me anyway. I'm not taking this on the road or anything. And something that's going to be functional and worth the time and effort. I found these cutoff sections out in the garage. I was working on insulating the garage and was using some of these for that, and had some cutoff pieces. So I thought these would be perfect to cut and brace underneath each one of these little pedestals, as well as put a riser on the back of this board. And it doesn't really flex a whole lot with that riser, and that's one of the things I was afraid it would do. So the other thing that I noticed is this is 2 sheets. I didn't secure them in any way. I'm going to use the liquid nails to seal that up so it doesn't fall apart. Maybe route some of the edges with like a sander or something, make them nice and smooth. And the other thought I had is zip ties are expensive if you're clipping them off and putting them back on all the time and changing your setup. So what I had laying around was some of this Velcro. I'd still have to do the same holes, but I'd be able to use Velcro instead, and that can be reused instead of buying 8,000 zip ties all the time. I also went ahead and I used the liquid nails and I glued these two together, and I reinforced each one of these little pedestals. Didn't really show you the process behind that. It's pretty boring. I just have some basic hand tools that I got from the Goodwill for really cheap, and I just kind of rough this stuff in. I get it pretty close, and for the money I spent, basically all this stuff is already paid for because it's scraps from other things that I'm doing. So for the money I spent, if it comes out halfway decent and it works, I'm good with it. I'm still going to hit each one of these with probably a sander, try and make this look a little better, because yeah, it looks rough and crappy, and that's kind of my gig. I sort of like rat rod sort of stuff, but I'd also like to try to make it look decent. So I was out in the barn of inspiration, I call it, my garage storage, and I found this. This used to be from an old oscilloscope. It's two handles, because this was a tube oscilloscope. It was massive and heavy, and it needed two handles. It's been sitting on the shelf for a couple of years, still in pretty good condition. Hasn't fallen apart yet, and I thought it would be perfect to mount to the back of my pedal board. If I cut that piece of metal away and this piece of metal away, it'll fit like a puzzle piece into the back, and I can secure it back here. And then I'll have two handles to pick up my pedal board with. So I wanted to show you this trick really fast. I put the pedestals underneath here, lined up on the board. I went and drilled through the bottom of the board and the pedestal. That way I don't have to line it up. It's all lined up already. So on our pedestal build, we went through the bottom of the board into the bottom of the pedestals. We had everything flipped over, so there wasn't a whole lot of measuring and lining up. We drilled through once. Everything lines up now. It's pretty good. I cut the handle for the pedal board, and it fits really well. I'm pretty impressed with it. I want to sand this first, and then we're going to secure it with the already supplied holes, and then we'll have a nice sturdy handle to pick up the pedal board with. One thing I wanted to go over, when I was cutting this, you can see I nicked the handle, and that's because the blade travel, and you always want to be aware of which way the blade is spinning. And usually I am. This time I wasn't. The blade was spinning this direction, so when it caught, it finally took it and nicked my work, and that's always upsetting when that happens. So when you're cutting, if you can, try and make it so that the direction of the blade goes the opposite direction of your hand or the part of the project you're trying to save. Always be aware of the travel. The other thing that I do is I kind of score the pieces here and here and break away the metal. I get it cut down low enough where I can just kind of break the piece away rather than burning up my expensive discs, because you're going to have to sand it and deburr it anyway, so you might as well just get it close, break it off, and then spend the rest of the time sanding the work. I found some old semi-gloss black paint. I'm going to hit the pedestals with them and the actual baseboard, and then I'm going to sand. I think it'll add a cool, rough, outlined finish to the project. I think some things have changed. The furniture T-nuts on the bottom of these pedestals, one of them spun out again. I'm not going to glue it. Seems like a waste of time. I just pulled it, threw it away. We're going to go with the lags on those. Just lag those in. And then my other thought was, we'll see if I can do it, is putting a handle here and a hinge on the other side of the pedestal so you could open that. I've also marked where I'm going to drill for the Velcro ties. That turned out pretty good. That's not going anywhere. Do a little more of it. I did a little bit of sanding as kind of a test. Doesn't look so good right now, but give it a couple of passes. I think it'll look better. Also, the handle turned out really well, and it works. I'm certainly not going to call this done yet. So I'd like to clean up some of those edges. But this is looking pretty good. As you saw, I carried it in here on those handles. This is pretty solid. One of the things that I would like to do, I'm going to put a handle here and a hinge so I can open that and get down to the power supply that I'm building. I kind of abandoned the ideas of taking these pedestals off. Those furniture nuts, they just don't hold very well. They're not going to work out for that. This is hopefully going to solve the noise issues I've been having, and I'll shoot a little video of that later. Those daisy chain pedal board leads, I think what actually happens, what I've read happens, is it's just a giant ground loop, and that's why it gets noisy, because each one of those pedals by themselves is perfectly fine. So this is an attempt to hopefully solve that, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to have, I can only fit about 5 power supplies. Each one's going to be, all my pedals pretty much take 9 volt. Each one's going to be 9 volt. I'm going to recase them here so that I can wire them onto my power leads coming from my power source. And this is just a IEC socket with a circuit breaker, and I think inside of there is a noise filter. I'm just going to daisy chain, and this is kind of the poor man's way of doing it. I'm just going to daisy chain each one of these primary supplies for the 9 volts, and then have my 9 volt whips going out to my pedal. For now, since again I'm trying to do this without spending a whole lot of money, because current events, I'm just going to have each power lead come out this little window here. In the future, what I'd really like to do is wire each one of these to a socket, and then actually have just an extension cable go from that. And now that'll probably cost a little more, but it'll look nicer, I think. And we'll kind of play with that in the future. Not in this video. I reused this case. This was I honestly don't know what this was. It had something to do with radio, I think, and radio antenna, something along those lines. It was perfect size to fit under the pedestals on my pedal board build. So I'm going to build this out. Each one of these little cases has its own cover, which I know they're plastic. It's what I had. I didn't have any metal boxes. If I need to, I could probably shield them, but I think this metal case will do a good enough job of that where I don't have to. We'll see. So here on my pedal board supply build, I've taken these little project boxes. Each one has a cover. I'll show you. That way I can seal these up. And I mounted them to the bottom of the case. I have some little foam squares to keep it from grounding out, because in the original wall wart, that's all they used was foam. So we'll just reuse foam again. And then I'm going to cut some of this terminal strip into each position so I can mount my power leads to and run the DC leads out the front. This is just some scrap foam I got in like a shipping container that I cut into squares to fit. And this is just some round of the day terminal strip. You can find these online. I happen to run across them a lot in my daily travels, pulling them from installs and things. So I've got a surplus of them. These particular ones that are plastic and they're kind of breakaway, those are really nice because you can kind of customize, and you can use that center hole there for mounting. Another thing I like to do, since I'm going to be using these terminal blocks in my pedal supply build, I'm going to have them clamped onto the primary side. I like to tin the leads going into the terminal block. It's easier to clamp onto, and keeps the strands together. A lot of times what'll happen is over, clamping them 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times, the strands tend to break, and then you're clipping the wire and stripping it back, and before you know it, you don't have any wire left to clamp onto. I find that tinning them seems to prolong the life of the wire in those situations, and it makes it a lot easier. You just stick it in there. There's no stray strands touching other things that they shouldn't. I like to keep the leads probably about half that length. Not that it would matter, because it's going to be the same thing on both sides going in. But I like to keep them kind of short and then clamp them in like that. Here's my power supply drawer. It's a little wobbly. That's what that's going to look like. And I put a little lock on it. You kind of got to reach up under here, give it a little pressure. And lock it. And that way you can still step on it and use it like a pedal board. So now, all that's left is to finish up the power supply. I could get back to sanding someday, but we'll see. Here's the pedal supply build. I just took this block and jumped it to our first little modular power supply, and that should be 9 volts. I ran both of our leads to the LED on the front that I saved. I didn't clip it because I thought I could connect it to one of these power supplies so that when you flip the switch on, you get the LED. No burning, no magic smoke. Looking good so far. You hear that horrible, horrible hum? That is what I was dealing with prior to this pedal board build. And that's definitely coming from this pedal board and this daisy chain situation. It's not so bad with all the pedals off, but it's still, that's unusable. With all of them on, not that I would really ever want to do that. It's even worse. That would sound pretty cool without all that noise. But that noise is pretty unusable. We can't do anything with that. And you know, it might not be the daisy chain. That power supply that I'm using to supply this is 600 milliamps. Each one of these pedals is looking for 300, I believe. Yeah, 300 milliamp max. That doesn't mean that's what they're drawing, but maybe that pedal supply doesn't give us enough amperage to do it. I personally think it's the daisy chain, and something in here is causing a giant ground loop. We'll see. So over in the corner is my test amp that I pointed out in the introduction video. That's the amp that we feed things that could be potentially dangerous because we don't care if it goes up in smoke or not. Over here is the same pedal board I just demoed, and over there is our power supply box we're building for our pedal board. The output that's feeding this board now has about 2,000 milliamps instead of 600. That rattle you're hearing is just that cheesy amplifier, but it sounds much better. There's no effects on right now, but there's no noise either. That's all 5 pedals. We picked up a little bit of noise. That's a lot more tolerable as far as noise goes. I could have just used that one power supply from the beginning to power this, but I still have a whole pedal board full of pedals to power with individual supplies as well, so I'd be filling up a whole power strip, which you could do, and it'd probably be fine. But I would prefer to have this situation where I only plug in one power whip, and I don't have to carry around a power strip. Here's the finished product. Each one of these boxes has a supply in it. These back 2 are empty for now. It's for maybe future expansion. I think with these 3 supplies I can supply the whole pedal board with the daisy chains without experiencing the noise that I had before. And powering the whole thing is this little circuit breaker, and I think there's a noise filter also in there someplace. Maybe not. I thought there was. Oh, nope, EMI filter right there. So I mostly grabbed it because it's just an IEC socket I can use for my 120, and all the rest of that stuff's kind of a bonus. But it powers on, it works good. I got the lamp connected to the 9-volt supply. That's just a singular 9-volt supply. That one I'm probably not going to chain to too many. These 2 I think are going to be my daisy chains because That one's 1.5 amp and this one's 2000. I saved the little plates for the wall warts. I taped that one on there because it was just a sticker. I have this one in here. It's part of the plastic and I couldn't get it out. Someday I might mount it there. We'll see. I think this power supply though is ready to drop in and give it a test. As with all my builds, I put these on terminal strips and the 120, like these, so that I can bring my 120 in here and take the 120 to the transformer out. Why I do that kind of stuff is if anything ever goes wrong in here, or one of these supplies decides it doesn't like working anymore. Each one of them has, except for this one, these two have their own fuse, so that fuse could blow and that supply wouldn't be any good anymore. I'd have to sit there and undo all this wiring. With this, I just undo the two screw terminals, take the lid off, pull the supply out, put a new one in, or fix that board and put it back. I try to do modular construction with all my builds so that they're easy to service. From working on a lot of gear, I've noticed that the trend has kind of gone away from that, and I would like to bring it back to it. I'm going to place the power supply, and I'm probably going to test out some pedals before we go, full into connecting all the audio and all that. I just want to kind of verify it fits and everything. Everything works, all the supplies are good. I've already run over the supplies with my meter and tested to be sure that positive is to the shell and negative is into the pin. All of my pedals, except for two, which are battery powered, which I can kind of rig these snaps up to snap into the snaps that are already in the pedals, kind of like this. And I could wire them back to a power supply or a jack. I might do that in the future. I'm kind of hesitant at this time because this whole thing is new, and I want to kind of try it out for a little while before I go hacking into that. And one thing that I do is this particular power supply had the ends clipped off. It was probably a connector I don't use too much, so I cut those off. But I just took another power jack from another supply and soldered it in, making sure that positive went to shell, again with continuity on my meter. You just test continuity to the leads to find out where they go. Twist them together, solder them, cover them with some tape, and you're good. I said tape, but I actually meant heat shrink. I don't like using tape because after a short amount of time it leaves a sticky residue all over your gear. And it's not fun cleaning it, and the tape falls off anyway. And in my particular line of work, they use electrical tape all the time to do that sort of a thing. I'm always going up into these installs and pulling all this gooey tape mess off of there, and I'm tired of it. I don't want to do it. I don't want it to happen to my own gear. So I don't use tape really ever. I mostly always use heat shrink. I'll only use tape in certain circumstances where I can't get any heat shrink on it. Actually, I had to use it inside this power supply in one of my little modular supply units. I couldn't get a piece of foam in there and close the lid, so I just taped the bottom so nothing would short out. So that fits pretty well. And the main power lead is over here. I could almost build in a divider here so that this doesn't flop around. Maybe I'll do that at a later date. it's not going to be moving around much, so I'm not too worried about it. That fits pretty good. Uh-oh. Let's see our first problem. Wow. Okay, so it just made it, but my little lever here to lock this top, if I put a divider in, I actually can't put one there. It'd have to be smaller and kind of wedged in there. I might even have a piece of foam I could do that with. That makes it difficult for me to lock. But if you notice, over on this end, these bolts are a little larger than they should be. I could take my Dremel and cut those off, move that over, and get probably just enough room to get my hand in there and actually lock that. But for the first dry fit, that works pretty good. Pretty happy with that. We can still get to our power switch down here. I'll show you that. The power switch is right there. Hard to see. Alright, so the dry fit works pretty good. We'll start doing some audio and power tests here in a minute. Bit of a side note here. I wanted to show you this. This is a pedal I just purchased off of one of the used sites. And this is how they decided to fix the 9-volt battery plug. And not only by me moving it out of the way did it separate some of the leads a little bit. That's eventually just going to twist off and break. That's a really bad soldering job. Not only that, these terminals can easily touch the side of the metal case and short out. So that I'm going to have to replace that before I even put this on the pedal board. But this is not the way you fix these. The way you should fix it, and I already have one waiting to transplant, is with a battery lead that's covered like that. There's a lot less chance of it shorting out. Some people even go the length of taping the battery. I've never really had to. It certainly doesn't hurt if you feel like you need to. And I mean, it's just another precaution that you can take. I'm gonna have to separate this video into two parts again. I cut out a lot of my own rambling on a lot of these videos to cut them down to a half hour and only give you the information you need. And they seem to be running over a half hour on the regular. So part 2, I'm gonna set up all the audio and take you through my power supply, showing how it sounds on chains of pedals with different daisy chains. So keep an eye out for part 2. Look out for more videos. I'm working on quite a few of them. I'm going to try and circle back around on these part 2s. I got a few of those hanging around too. And like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching.